Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Panachari Jamuna Tira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, shall I just begin?
Yes, Prabhu, that'd be fantastic.
All right then. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I think it's wonderful that Atman Nivedana has created such a lovely Sangha here. And hold on one moment while I get rid of some of these things that are standing in the way here. All right, there we go. And it's my great pleasure to be with you sometimes for these Saturday gatherings. I understand that this evening we're going to be reading chapter 30, text 30 from chapter 2 of the Bhagavad-gita. And I'm sure you all know what 2:30 is. 2:30 is when it's time to go see the dentist. Okay, here we go. There's the verse as follows. Dehi nityam avadyoyam dehe sarvasya bharata tasmat sarvani bhutani natvam shochitam arhasi. Dehi, the owner of the material body, nityam, eternally, avadya, cannot be killed, ayam, this soul, the owner of the material body, dehe, in the body, sarvasya, of everyone, bharata, O descendant of Bharat, tasmat, therefore, sarvani, all, bhutani, living entities, and then in parentheses, that are born, na, never, tvam, you, shochitam, to lament, arhasi, deserve. Translation of second chapter, text number 30. O descendant of Bharat, he who dwells in the body can never be slain. Therefore, you need not grieve for any living being. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Lord now concludes the chapter of instruction on the immutable spirit soul. In describing the immortal soul in various ways, Lord Krishna establishes that the soul is immortal and the body is temporary. Therefore, Arjuna, as a Kshatriya, should not abandon his duty out of fear that his grandfather and teacher, Bhishma and Drona, will die in the battle. On the authority of Sri Krishna, one has to believe that there is a soul different from the material body. Not to believe that, that there is no such thing as soul, or that living symptoms develop at a certain stage of material maturity resulting from the interaction of chemicals. Though the soul is immortal, violence is not encouraged. But at the time of war, it is not discouraged when there is actual need for it. That need must be justified in terms of the sanction of the Lord and not capriciously. This is, I want you to pay special attention to the way Srila Prabhupada has worded this. We straddle a kind of fine line in Krishna consciousness with the theology that is based on this fundamental idea. The idea of this verse is the foundation of all of Krishna consciousness. That he who dwells in the body can never be slain. That, first of all, that idea is revolutionary. To understand that one idea is a game changer. That one idea would shift the balance of everything. Nothing would ever be the same again if that one idea were properly understood. Imagine if people's decisions with regard to the conduct of proper governance, political relations, racial relations, economic programs, educational programs. Imagine the difference if there was a universal understanding of this one idea that the body is a covering. The body does not define the individual. How often it is over the course of the last several years that you may have remarked, as I have, a tendency in the news media to kind of lump people into very large categories. You know, there's this political party or that political party, as though a political party were some amorphous idea and not a community of individual men and women with particular perspectives. If it were possible to shift the focus away from external identities, liberal, conservative, right, left, whatever it may be, if it were possible to move the definition of human groupings away from black and white, if it were possible to cultivate an understanding of life as something that lives within bodies but which is different from those bodies. Imagine the kind of world we might have today. It's an extraordinarily powerful idea. And because it is an extraordinarily powerful idea, we have to be very, very careful how we relate to this concept of being different from the body. After my mom died 4 months ago, I started seeing a therapist, wonderful devotee therapist, whom I recommend to you if you're so inclined to find someone to help you think through issues that you may be dealing with. And I asked her name is Krishna Leela. I asked her, what, you've been counseling devotees all over the world for many years. What is the one thing that you have found that you think is the most dangerous mistake that devotees make internationally, worldwide? What is the one thing you have found that has been the greatest danger? And her answer was very revealing. She said, when they say we are not our bodies. Now, think about that. That's the foundation of our entire perspective, the entire Siddhanta of Krishna consciousness, the conclusion of Krishna consciousness. Everything is predicated on this one idea. And yet here is someone saying that this one idea is the most dangerous thing that she has ever encountered. Now, why would that be? Well, think about it. If you are not carefully educated in how to relate to the idea of being different from the body, it can become an excuse for all kinds of tragic behavior. We're not our bodies, therefore I can afford to be indifferent to you. I don't have to pay attention to you because your needs are all on the material platform. It's all bodily. If we're not our bodies, then I can ignore you altogether. I don't need to pay attention to you because I'm more interested in the spiritual things. We're not our bodies, therefore I'm justified in behaving in a cruel or hurtful way because it doesn't matter. Back in the 1960s, there was a murderer named Charles Manson, cult figure, who sent his disciples out to kill a group of nursing students. And he was caught and thrown in jail where he spent his life there. And when a reporter got to speak with him and say, why did you have those students killed? He said, well, I've been reading the Bhagavad-gita. And in the Bhagavad-gita, it says that he who dwells in the body can never be slain. So therefore, they're not actually killing anyone. Just to give you an idea that this is very real, this misappropriation of Krishna's teachings for all kinds of heinous, horrible behaviors. So this is knowledge that is real, but it is knowledge that needs to be approached very, very, very carefully. And I urge everyone here on this in this group tonight to discuss this, to think very carefully about what it means to live life in a way that is on the spiritual platform. It doesn't mean to ignore the material. This life is a gift from God. This life is the tool through which we cultivate our spiritual progress. And to ignore or abuse or to somehow reject the body and by extension our families, our communities, on the pretext of, well, now I'm a spiritual person, is the worst kind of misunderstanding of what Krishna intends here. By telling Arjuna that he who dwells in the body can never be slain, Krishna is not telling Arjuna, well, now you have permission to go do whatever you want. In fact, quite the opposite. There is, if you read the Mahabharata, what we find is that war, the Battle of Kurukshetra, was the last thing that anyone wanted. No one wanted violence. No one. Not Krishna, not the Pandavas. No one wanted this battle. And they tried every imaginable alternative means to avoid bloodshed. They tried diplomacy and they tried sanctions. They tried even giving away the kingdom. Arjuna offered, just give us one village each and you keep the kingdom. You keep the kingdom. That's fine. That's up to you. We just, because we're Kshatriyas, we have to have one little place at least that we can manage on our own. The Kauravas were so envious that their response was, we will not even give you enough land in which to drive the head of a pin. And because of that very hurtful and egotistical position, war became inevitable. But it was not by any means the first choice. So there are a few things additional to understand about the idea of not being the body. What does it mean that we're not the body? Well, it doesn't mean just exclusively the physical apparatus. There's a verse in Bhagavad-gita where Krishna describes, it's coming up, Bhumir apanalo vayu kamano buddhir evacha akhankaritiya me bina prakriti astada. These 8 elements, Krishna says, earth, water, fire, air, sky or space, mind, intelligence, and ego. These 8 elements comprise my separate material energies. Then, parastasmadu ava anyo vyakta, I'm losing my Sanskrit. Beyond these 8, there is another energy, which is the living entities. So here Krishna describes the 5 what are called Mahabhuta, the elements that comprise the physical body. Then there's also the mind and the intelligence and the ego. Ideally, our mental functions will come under the guidance of the intelligence. That doesn't always happen. The way the intelligence is capable of managing mental activity is if it's properly educated. If there isn't sufficient education and if there isn't sufficient practice of devotional principles, sadhana, then the mind becomes stronger than the intelligence. And wherever the senses lead the mind, that's what we end up doing. In fact, coming up later in this 2nd chapter, there's this brilliant description by Krishna about how when one focuses the mind on the objects of the senses, one develops a desire for those things. And from that desire, lust arises. There's some, now I'm going to act on it. I'm going to get this thing that I want. And then anger. Why anger? Because you generally can't get what you want. So you get angry about that. And then when anger develops, bewilderment of memory. When you're angry, you can't think straight. And when memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost and one falls down again into the material whirlpool. The brilliant analysis of human behavior coming up in this chapter. So there's a distinction between the senses, the mind, the intelligence, the ego, and the self, the body and the self. But that's only true in the material world. In the spiritual world, there's no distinction between mind, intelligence, body, soul. They're all of the same spiritual nature. You only have a distinction between you and your mind in the material world. You only have a distinction between you and your intellect in the material world. On the spiritual platform, it's all of the same spiritual nature. Here, they are separate elements and they need to be managed properly, just as the body requires to be properly cared for, kept healthy, restrained. The mind similarly requires proper exercise and restraint, and the intelligence requires proper exercise and guidance. So those distinctions are there as long as we are in a material body. The mind stays with us. The mind is the vehicle that is called manorata, the rata, or the chariot of the mind. The mind is what carries us from one lifetime to the next. At the moment of death, this is coming up soon in Gita, yam yam vapi smaram bhavam chajati ante kalevaram tam tam evaiti konteya sada tad bhava bhavata. Ante kale, at the end of life, whatever the mind is focused on, that mind then becomes the chariot that brings the true self to its next destination. So the body we live in now has been constructed from the subtle elements of our previous lives. The thoughts, the desires, consciousness, the ambitions, the dreams, the urges that we have cultivated previously become the soil from which this lifetime grows. So the habits and behavior that you exhibit in this life have their origins in previous lives. But here's the interesting thing. You can't access those previous lives. There's nothing you can do about them. They're gone. They're over. The life you can access is the one you're living now. So think about this for a moment. If our behavior, our personalities, our values, our aspirations, our attitudes towards other people, toward the world around us, if all these things have their origin in previous lives by the law of karma, how do they manifest in this lifetime? Interesting. They manifest as our genetic predisposition. They manifest as the kind of parenting situation that we grow up in. They manifest in the form of the conditions that surround us as we grow from childhood to adulthood. If there are predispositions toward disease, if there are circumstances that form our behavior and personality from early life, that's the part of our identity that we can deal with. So, of course, this is something that's been on my mind since my mom passed away. I don't think I ever experienced such a depth of grief and emotion. And I wanted to understand what's that all about? I know I'm not my body. So why this, depth of feeling? So I apologize. I think even the last time I was invited to be here with you, I spoke a little bit about this. So if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. But it's been a really profound learning experience for me. I've been in Krishna consciousness now since December of 1969. So that's more than 50 years. This experience of losing my mother has taught me more about myself as a devotee than pretty much anything I can think of. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, death has become something more than just a concept. If any of you here in this discussion this evening have lost someone dear to you, you know what I'm talking about. Death hurts. And even though we may know from chapter 30 of text 30 of chapter 2 Bhagavad-gita that we're not the body, still the grief we feel on losing someone we've known from some kind of a material relationship can be excruciating. It's in a strange way, it's helped me to understand a little bit about the devotees who surrounded Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If you go back in time, and if you read the biographies, which I've had a chance to read a few different biographies of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recently, the Chaitanya Mangala of Lochan Das Thakur, Chaitanya Bhagavat of Vrindavan Das Thakur. There's a biography. Of course, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Chaitanya Charitamrita is our guidebook. That's the one that Srila Prabhupada translated and commented. But these various books, another book by Narahari Chakravarti called the Bhakti Ratnakara, describes the lives of the devotees around Chaitanya after Mahaprabhu left the world. It's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. The descriptions of, not just Mahaprabhu, but that whole first generation of devotees, one after another, they all die, they all leave the world. And you have someone like Srinivas Acharya who is desperate to get the association of the devotees who knew Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he goes to Vrindavan, and then he finds out that this one just died and that one just died. He's so heartbroken he can't get the association of these devotees. And when they hear that Nityananda Prabhu has left the planet, Advaita Prabhu has left the planet, and Gadadhar Prabhu has left the planet, they all faint. Everyone's fainting all the time. In a strange way, losing my mom gave me a sense of loss that I had not understood previously. So don't reject those experiences. What we experience in this life, even from a so-called material perspective, those are very valuable experiences. Those are tools that will help you to come deeper inside an understanding of the Krishna consciousness perspective. Bhaktivinoda Thakur once described the material world as a dictionary of the spiritual world. The things that we see here are reflections of the original thing in the spiritual world. So what's the difference? Well, one difference is, for example, grief in this world is shortens your duration of life. It can make you sick. It can make you so catatonic and depressed that some people commit suicide from grief. Grief in the spiritual world is an impetus to love. So there are distinctions. There's grief in the spiritual world, but it does not have that dark side that we experience here. The spiritual world is the origin of everything. One time, someone asked Srila Prabhupada, it was winter, and it snowed, and they asked him, "Is there snow in the spiritual world, Srila Prabhupada?" He said, "Yes, but it's warm." And it rains also in the spiritual world, but usually at night so that it doesn't disturb anyone during the day. So things are there in the spiritual world, and they're reflected here in this world. The emotions are there, the relationships are there. So don't reject what's happening to you, even if it's a very sad thing. What you're going through, there's a kernel of truth there. There's a connection to be made in every instance of life. So again, this verse, "O descendant of Bharata, he who dwells in the body can never be slain. Therefore, you need not grieve for any living being," does not mean to become indifferent or to turn your back on others or to be negligent. Quite the opposite. What Krishna is describing here is a situation that is specific to Arjuna. Arjuna was grieving for the potential deaths he would cause by fighting the Kaurava army. Krishna is trying to persuade him, don't get caught up in that kind of sentimentality. That's different. That's a different thing. To become caught up sentimentally in the idea of altruism and reaching out to others, that can be dangerous because it can lead to compromise. It can lead to inaction, just the way Arjuna here has become inactive. He's become catatonic, thinking about how can I harm these people? Right? They're the leaders of our society. I see relatives. I see my teacher, Dronacharya there. My grandfather, Bhishma, is there. Krishna is trying to snap him out of that inaction by some cutting words, some harsh words here. But balance this now. Take this moment in the Gita and balance it with what we read elsewhere. Elsewhere in the Gita, Krishna describes, he who is most dear to me is someone who never causes any harm or any inconvenience to anyone else. One who sees as equal animals and humans, vidya vinaya sampani brahmani gavi hastani, who is kind to the dogs and the cows. He's exalting ahimsa, nonviolence, as the most elevated of human qualities. So imagine how difficult it is for Arjuna to try and reconcile these two things. Here's Krishna telling him, love everybody. Now go out and kill your enemy. It's sometimes difficult to strike a proper balance. So here's the good news. We're not Kshatriyas. You're not going to have to worry about this. It's not something you're going to have to confront in this lifetime, more than likely. So this is the balance that we have to strike when we deal with this extraordinarily powerful idea of being different from the body. Different from the body does not mean indifferent to the body. That's very different. And that has no place in the life of Krishna consciousness. Right? So I'm going to stop yakking, and maybe we can open this up to some questions. What do you think, Sash Prabhu? Can we do that?
Sure. Everyone can unmute themselves if they have any question.
Hare Krishna, Yogesvara Prabhu.
Please tell me your name. I don't see you.
Oh, sorry. I'm Andrea.
Hare Krishna, Andrea.
Hare Krishna. When you were mentioning about, not being indifferent to others and justifying cruel and hurtful behavior because of this key idea that's taught in the Bhagavad-gita, the first thing that came to my mind was Rukmini Prabhu is always saying that Bhakti Yoga is about radical personalism, and not just in the concept of God, but in how we act with others and behave with others. Yeah. And I feel like that's really helped me sometimes when I listen to lectures. There's some lectures by certain devotees that sometimes feel very cold-hearted in how they're talking about relationships with others and how we associate with the material world and everything. And this idea always helps me in balancing it. But my question is, when we do come upon devotees who are talking in a way that it feels like they're encouraging that cold-heartedness, how do we address that, or how do we even handle that at all?
Oh, goodness, you're so polite. I'm not as polite as you are. I think they should turn in their neck beads myself. Look, I don't know. I've pondered this for a long time. I'm old enough that I can speak my mind here. No one's going to kick me out of ISKCON. I think some of the old timers, from my generation, if they've lived in communities too long, if they haven't had enough interaction with the rest of the world, they become very insular. And if there isn't enough experience of the practical duties of everyday life, if if you're living secluded from careers, if they're not going to offices and working, if they don't have to earn money to pay their bills or whatever it is, it's easy to fall into a kind of easy rhetoric. There's a rhetoric in ISKCON that, if I were to just speak from the rhetoric of ISKCON, I'd say, so the demons never worship the deities in the temple because they think they're their bodies, and they're going straight to Patala Loka and just chant Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I don't quite know what good that is. But for a long time, there was a certain kind of easy falling into that. And in large measure, it's due to a kind of laziness. If you're not careful, and this applies to everybody, if you're not careful, you can find yourself in a kind of habit. You become habituated to a certain kind of life as a devotee that becomes repetitive. Today is more or less a repetition of what happened yesterday. And if you're not stretching the envelope, if you're not really working to deepen your understanding of our view of things and what it is that we're meant to accomplish in the world. Look, for some people, maybe that's fine. There are some people, not everyone is meant to go out and become, an agent of change in society. And for some people who may not be prepared to work in that larger arena, just having a simple devotee life is fine. I don't particularly appreciate when they fall into cliches, and foster, an indifferent kind of behavior toward others by profiling them. Those are karmis and we're the devotees, I got to tell you something. I know people, they don't have Sanskrit names, okay? But man, they love God. And I wish someday that I could have 1 ounce of the kind of love and devotion to God that they have. They have no idea of Krishna and Vrindavan. I know Jesuit monks, I know some Catholic nuns. I have friends who are Franciscan. I mean, I've got a wide range of friends, and some of these people are just so beautiful. Sufis. I've got friends who are Sufis. I've got friends who are atheists. And frankly, I wish I had an ounce of the awe that they experience about the universe. They have this amazing appreciation for God's creation. It's beautiful. So who's the better devotee, right? Someone who's gotten first initiation, second initiation, but their sadhana is sloppy, their compassion is minimal, and they speak in cliches. Is that person a better devotee than someone who may not be initiated into Krishna consciousness, but they get it? They get that this is a purposeful universe and that all living beings are sparks of God. Who's the better devotee, right? So, I'm always urging people, just, go out and live life. Don't get stuck in a rut like that. Find out about the world. Find out find out where your passion is, so that you'll know what kind of service to do. Mythologist Joe Campbell used to say, follow your bliss. Find out what it is that excites you and go and do that. Find something that you can learn from, something that will expand your knowledge of this extraordinary creation around us. So I don't know. I try not to get too het up about people who give those kinds of classes, because they're devotees after all, and you don't want to be offensive to anyone, no matter what their level of understanding. So Hope that's helpful in some way.
I'd like to say something. I have several questions. First of all, you said, when talking about grief, you said we don't grieve for any of them. Is that what the Bhagavad-gita says? Or we don't grieve for these people? Because I think that, my understanding, and it may not be the right understanding, is that Krishna was very much fighting evil, and there was a great rise of evil and a great wave of evil taking them, and Arjuna was going to, and the evil came from close family ties, and Arjuna was going to kill them. So we don't grieve for any of them, or we don't grieve for those people that are supposedly evil, or they are evil. Second, another thing is, what I like to say is, you talk about how people cannot really see soul. When we are souls, we are not our bodies, and they have, and their minds tend to really categorize and to put everything into compartments, into slots or whatever. He's fat, or he's unintelligent, or this and that. And I wonder, isn't it part of Krishna consciousness to surrender our intelligence, to not surrender our intelligence, to surrender our mind? Because it is the mind that is really not taught properly, if we're going to talk about.
Okay, so let's sort this out, because you're asking a lot of complicated things here.
Yes.
And there are several questions that you've posed. The first one is that Krishna is encouraging Arjuna not to be indifferent toward people, but specifically, he's facing an enemy who has to be brought down. In today's language, we'd call the Kauravas terrorists. Krishna is telling Arjuna, don't grieve for what you have to do here, for the people who are doing harm. They've lost the right to your compassion. By their behavior, they have forfeited their place in the company of civilized people, and they must be brought down, and that's your job. If you don't do it, you will become implicated in the ongoing harm and terror and evil that these people are perpetrating on the citizens of the kingdom. So that's very specific to Arjuna here. When Krishna says you need not grieve for any living being, he's talking to Arjuna on two levels here. One is a general principle. Yes, that we know that, like I grieve for my mom, but on an intellectual level, I know her soul goes on, and I'm grateful to have had her in my life, and I wish her well. Fine. But specifically, Arjuna had a responsibility here to fight and kill. You can't do that if you're thinking, oh, I don't wish to cause them harm. Their souls as well. That's misplaced compassion. So that's very specific to the story that's going on here. You're asking a very different question when you're asking about control of the mind or surrendering the mind. We want to be careful about words like surrender. It's also, that can become an excuse for saying, well, my dear spiritual master, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. That's not Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is learning to exercise your initiative under the guidance of a spiritual master, but the job is yours. Prabhupada gave the example of birds, a flock of birds flying in the sky. He says they seem to have an intimate relationship because they're all flying together. But if one bird gets into trouble and starts to fall from the sky, there's nothing the other birds can do. So in a similar way, we are a community, we're a sangha, and we help each other as best we can. Each of us has the responsibility to exercise discretion, best judgment, and initiative to act in the most beneficial way for the greatest number of people. So be careful when you say things like surrendering the mind, that you're not opening the door to someone else should tell me just what I should do. Right? That's not the kind of surrender that we're talking about in bhakti. I hope that's okay. Thank you. Those are many good questions you've been asking there. Bhakta Sasha, maybe there's someone else who has a question they'd like to ask.
I do not know about the question, but I just saw a comment from one of our viewers on Facebook, Sylvia Bueno. I think she's psychology student in London. So she says, thank you so much. When my mother left her body, I felt pressure to move on from the grief and couldn't reconcile my grief with the Vedic teachings and devotees around me. It would have been very helpful to have listened to you. But I will make sure to be there for anyone with the same struggles.
Yeah. Yeah, this was a rough one. I won't try to hide that. I was an only child, and my mother was a single parent. She brought me up on her own. We lived in a little apartment. So she was my best friend, really, my whole life. And anyone who's lost someone, the grief that accompanies that is also a tool. Everything. I mean, look at what Srila Prabhupada did. Not what to speak of grief. His death, he offered to us as a tool for our spiritual advancement. Most of you, I think, were too young or maybe not in Krishna consciousness yet, but in 1977, when Prabhupada passed away in Vrindavan, it was a miracle to watch him do that. He could barely speak. He could not lift his arm. He could not move his leg. He was so thin, you saw the bones sticking out from his skin. He had not eaten in so long. His voice was so soft, he was so weak that Jayadvaita Swami had to put the microphone right by his mouth. And up till practically the last minute, he was translating from 10th canto Srimad Bhagavatam, and his thoughts were so lucid, he was offering commentary. Moments before leaving this world, he was still performing devotional service. And he said, bring everyone. In the West, usually death is hidden behind the, sterile white doors of a hospital room somewhere or whatever. Prabhupada said, let everyone come. Everyone was around him. Some were massaging his feet. Some were putting a pillow under his arm. There was kirtan going on around him. He used everything as a way of helping us to understand how to be in Krishna consciousness. Of course, that's an extraordinary, miraculous example, but everything in our life is meant like that. Everything has some purpose. Our job is to figure out what that purpose is. That's our job. Our job is to look at even the most difficult of situations, particularly the most difficult of situations, and say, Krishna is so kind. He's speaking to me here. I wish to be grateful to him that, there's a verse, I think it's 11th or 12th canto. Tatenus kampasu samikshamano bunjana evatma kritam vibhakam hridvad vabubir vidadan namaste Jivito yo mukti hride sadayabak. A devotee who lives his life or her life and encounters difficulties and thinks, by my tragic activities in the past, I deserved a lot worse. But by God's grace, by Krishna's grace, the effects have been minimized. Let me now go on with my service. Someone with that mentality, Jivito yo mukti hride sadayabak. The Sanskrit term dayabak means an inheritance. Just as a child has the right to the inheritance of the parents' estate, someone who has this mentality that Krishna is speaking to me, even in this moment, this very difficult moment, that person has earned devotional service as their birthright. It's their inheritance. They own it. It's theirs. Good to be reminded of that from time to time. I remember Prabhupada saying that the only reason to be anxious is if you think something is acting outside of Krishna's control. That's worth repeating. The only reason to be anxious is if you think something is acting outside of Krishna's control. You may not always understand why things happen the way they do. After all, it's a sad world, a tragic world sometimes. But remembering that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. I mean, one of the things about being different from the body only sees the slightest surface of things. We can't see what's going on in the next room. We can't hear what's going on down the block. Our perceptions are very limited. Krishna consciousness means to know that beneath this little bit of the tip of the iceberg, which is what our senses can perceive, there's this vast cosmic arrangement. And in that vast arrangement, there are explanations for things that may escape us just now. We are compelled by our faith to accept that there are deeper dimensions to every moment of our life.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I'm
Krishna.
sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry. Go ahead.
No, Tina, go.
Okay.
I already had
okay.
my turn.
Okay. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for this class. I thank you for your understanding of this text, because I feel like you reminded me and others, well, you checked us like, hey, don't be impersonal to other people, right? Don't act like just because we're not the body, we shouldn't treat people or anything like, so I thank you for that. But I was going to say that I've only been studying bhakti for like 4 years, not very long, not like you. And I found in the beginning it very hard, very easy to detach from the things around me, because there's so much issues, and as the Vedas explain, a lot of things are because of karma and guna. So you start to just, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to detach from all of this. And then you find yourself in the position where, maybe like things and people in your old life you can't really connect to anymore, because there's all these like all these things that people tell you, like, oh, hey, it's like all of these rules of karma, like, I can't eat in these restaurants anymore. I can't eat from the fork in my family's house, because it's got karma on it, because they're eating meat. And you start to like detach naturally from all of these things. And and what you're preaching is like cultivation of attachment with these people, and it's just like, where's the line? You know, like I'm trying to not be fanatic about karma. I'm trying to cultivate a path so that I may please Krishna and get to Krishna. But, you know, sorry, it's my baby. Cultivate a path to get to Krishna. But, you know, you also want to keep compassion for people and things around you. So I don't, you know, I don't know where the line is, you know, and every day I'm like, it's like I'm walking a tightrope. I'm trying to please Krishna, and I'm trying to please those around me, and I'm trying not to develop more karma, and I'm trying to raise my guna, and I just don't, you know, do you hear what I'm saying?
Of course, it's a familiar dilemma. If you don't mind me giving you another Prabhupada story, I asked him one time, this was in Paris, I said, Prabhupada, well, here's the backstory. In those days, 73 or so, we didn't have any money. You know, the movement in France wasn't even a movement. It was more like I don't know what it was. It was just, you know, just trying our best to keep things together. A friend of George Harrison, named Maxime had a few nightclubs, and she was a friend of George Harrison's, and she came up to us and met on the street, and she said in French, she said, I want to throw a party for you so that you can have some donations and build a temple in Paris. George told me that you wanted to build a temple in Paris. So she said, come to New Jimmy at midnight on Friday night. Now, New Jimmy was kind of like the hot disco of 1973 in Paris. And the floor of the club was made of mirrors. And all the women wore short skirts. And outside the club on Friday nights, it would just be limos everywhere. So it was like the hot place to go. And but kind of dangerous. So I went to Prabhupada, who was visiting Paris at that time. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, there's this person, Maxime, who wants to throw a fundraiser for us. And she asked us to come and meet her at her club midnight on Friday night. It's like, that's when all the dancing and drinking is going on. What should we do? Should we go? And he looked and he said, go fishing, just don't get wet. And I asked him, well, okay, we'll do our best. But as a general principle, what should we do? Because there are times when we're confronted with things and there is no clear explanation in the scriptures, you know, in your books, how we should act in a certain situation. What do we do then? He said, you use your intelligence. He says there's two things. There's Vediki and Lokiki. Vediki sounds like what it sounds like, Veda. That's Vediki, meaning that there's a direct explanation of what to do in the texts. It's codified. It's written in the text. That's a Vediki. Lokiki, loka means circumstance. Lokiki means that it may not be described in scripture. So then you have to use your intelligence about things. So my answer to you is the answer that Prabhupada gave me. Go fishing, just don't get wet. If you're visiting with your family, you know, you don't want to be insulting to them. So, you know, I can't tell you what to do, you know, because there's no one right thing here. But for myself personally, I veer toward the side of not making people feel bad. If someone's gone out of their way to cook me, a vegetarian dinner, just because I'm vegan and it may have some butter in it or something, I'm not going to say I can't, no, that's insulting to them. So I'm strict, but I'm not fanatical. And Prabhupada was that way too. He was strict, but he wasn't fanatical. Maybe some of us were fanatical, but he wasn't. He wasn't fanatical. So just be careful. Use your good judgment. You don't want to put yourself in harm's way. You don't want to do that. But there's some flexibility for the sake of devotional relations and so on. That's allowed. That's allowed.
We're talking about attachment, and to me, attachment is not to become vulnerable. Every time there's a table with dinner, it may be superficial, it may be very nice and very happy to get together for Thanksgiving, but there's something stale that goes on every time, and we cannot be affected by it. We don't get affected, and that to me, that means attachment, because we continue and we really persist on holding on to the scale of problems that that were in the past.
I got to tell you, I really do. And I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I have to tell you something, and this is from my own realization after many years in Krishna consciousness. People don't know what the heck they're talking about. When they talk about attachments or tolerate or anything, they don't know what they're saying. They have no idea. Attachment it can be good. Attachment can be important. This fear of, I'm going to get attached if I get too involved in this thing. That's harmful. That's dangerous. What are you afraid of? I'm going to get attached. What? Oh, if I love my partner, I'm going to get attached to them. Good. You should. You should be attached to your partner. That's why you're together. Be attached in a healthy way. And I had that same my therapist, Krishna Leela, after she said the most dangerous thing is we are not our bodies. I said, what's the next most dangerous thing? She said, tolerate. People use this word tolerate. Tolerance is the poorest excuse for true spiritual insight that I can imagine. More harm has been done in the name of these words, detachment and tolerate and not the body. More cruelty, more missed opportunities for spiritual advancement because of this artificial fear of, I'm going to get attached to this thing. What is your problem? Are you so afraid, of the world that you can't take some risks for developing your Krishna consciousness? If you are really afraid of getting attached, just don't get out of bed in the morning. Don't do anything. Really, seriously. If you're not willing to take some risks to progress spiritually, then just retire and read the Bhagavad-gita. And that's your prerogative if that's what you want to do. But if you want to understand anything about how to make spiritual progress, you cannot avoid engagement with the world. This world is our battlefield of Kurukshetra. This world is the arena for us to learn the lessons we need to learn. This world is the environment, the studio, if you will, where we get to exercise our spiritual tools. And you avoid that at great risk, at the risk of not making as much progress as you could have made otherwise. My advice to you is take the chance. Go out there, do something, even if it's risky, and you fall down and you scrape your knees. Okay, so get up and move on. I love what Winston Churchill once said during World War II. He says, if you find yourself in hell, keep going. We're in the material world after all. How can you avoid the risk of attachments and getting hurt and so on? But have some strength of your convictions. Prabhupada hasn't equipped you with nothing. He's equipped us with the most powerful tools imaginable for going out into the world and becoming agents of change. That's not going to happen if we don't take some risks. It's not going to happen. Every one of us on this phone call, we are meant to become the people who go out into the world at risk of life and limb to spread Krishna consciousness. It's not going to happen if you sit back. It's not going to happen. I think the one thing that most concerns me during this pandemic is that there's this social distancing and isolation, and we don't get a chance to do the very thing that our mission is all about, which is to get out there and be with other people and engage with the world. You have to find a way to do that even from within the confines of your home. That's how you'll make spiritual progress. So it's worth considering. It's worth further discussion. I thank you for your questions. All very, very good questions. Thank you. Dr. Sasha, how are we doing for time? Is there time for one more question, or are we at the end of our time together here?
Yeah, I think there is time for more questions.
One thing that interests me is that finally, Krishna is able to convince Arjuna to go fight, and he's convinced that Arjuna that he sees the largeness of Krishna, and he goes to fight. And this carriage idea that Krishna is holding, is really driving the senses, not driving the senses, but sort of controlling the senses. What is that, symbology? I mean, this picture, we see Krishna in front of the carriage and Arjuna in the back, and he's going to shoot arrows, and he's going to fight a war. And what does that mean in terms of, are we there and are we protected? Are we, do we get the wisdom through the Shastras or through Krishna himself? Maybe Krishna. I mean, is there, can you explain the picture of Krishna driving the horses and Arjuna throwing arrows in the back?
Well,
I mean,
sure. I mean, there's two things. One, on a literal plane, Arjuna is a warrior and is in a literal battle. It's not a metaphorical battle or some kind of a poetic myth or some epic story. There's an actual battle here. You can go to India and visit the battlefield of Kurukshetra. It's about a 3-hour train ride from Delhi. So it's an actual historic event. So from that literal level, Krishna is telling Arjuna, let me drive your chariot and you can do this. I won't let you down. I'll help you along the way. That was the deal. The deal was, again, if you go to the Mahabharata, the choice was given to Duryodhana. Krishna says, do you want me as your advisor, or would you like all of my armies? Duryodhana, being a materialistic person, said, I'll take your armies. He thought, if I have all the armies, then I'm going to win the battle. Arjuna was delighted because he could have Krishna as his advisor. If you have Krishna as your advisor, even if you are less equipped in other ways, you'll still come out fine. So that's Arjuna's situation. Our situation, of course, we're not, lifting physical bows and arrows, but we are allowing Krishna to drive the chariot of our life in the sense that we acknowledge that it's an interesting phrase, there's a kind of spiritual cosmic background to our lives, and that it's purposeful. Things are happening in our lives that have purpose. We may not always see it immediately, but that's the power of the chanting, by the way. If you chant sincerely, if you're paying attention to your chanting, and you allow that communion with Krishna through the holy names to work on you, things will get clearer. I won't say magical, but there is this extraordinary phenomenon of the meaning behind things becoming clearer as you progress in your chanting. That's the best advice that I can give you. You will find it. It's a very practical thing. Prabhupada said one class, when you're having a meal, nobody has to tell you when you're full. Meaning you'll know it. You'll understand it. You'll know it. You'll get it. Dedicate yourself sincerely to the chanting and watch what happens. It is an amazing thing, and you will experience it for yourself in due course of time. So thank you for again, more wonderful questions. I think we may be out of time now. Is that right, Bhakti Sasha?
No, this is Atma speaking. No, Prabhu, we're good. We're good. Unless you're running short. But
no, I maybe I misunderstood. I thought this was 45-minute class.
We're okay until 7. So if it's okay with you, I actually would like to ask one question.
Yes, please go right ahead.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so go fishing, but don't get wet. And nice. I like that. That's isn't that sort of like the analogy? Is it the analogy, or I don't know? For the lotus flower, it should, it's on the water, but it does above on top. It doesn't get wet.
No.
Be of the world, yeah, but don't be affected by it. Okay, so and you mentioned this idea in the context of associating with persons for whom you can, make some contribution or develop a good relationship without necessarily being affected by those aspects of a relationship which could, which I suppose can be disadvantageous to your development of Krishna consciousness. So I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I believe that was the concept. And then if my question is, I'd like to ask about that idea, go fishing, but don't get wet. In a related context, I suppose it's different. Maybe there's subtle nuance differences, but what about so you go do your job, and I'm not talking about the sannyasi whose job is to tell people about Krishna all day. So for me, it's running a type of business, a law firm. So do your job, and or a kshatriya, let's say, right? Arjuna, I think there's a place where Srila Prabhupada said, something like he got angry because how else can you fight in the war? So and I'm thinking for myself, the way to you do your job is you kind of do immerse yourself into it. Otherwise, there's no way you can turn it into something that's successful. And so how does that relate to the idea of go do it, but don't get affected by it? Because it seems like in part we're deliberately, or I'm deliberately letting myself be somewhat, not just influenced by this, but somewhat sort of enveloped by it. And then at the same time, I'm trying to, keep some sense of what is what from a higher platform.
Yeah, it's a good. You always ask good questions. Here's what I believe is happening. By introducing Krishna consciousness into the Western world, Srila Prabhupada essentially threw down the gauntlet to business and careers and industry and corporate life challenging us to redefine concepts such as profit, concepts such as progress. People generally go to work not because they want to, but because they have to. People go to work because they need money to pay their bills. People go to work because they're ambitious and they want to achieve some kind of position. And that's fine. That's what free market capitalism is built on, right? We're reaching a point historically when there's a new kind of ethos entering into the job market, into the workplace. The more progressive companies, the more resilient companies, the companies that have succeeded in weathering transitions, mergers, acquisitions, changing market conditions, and so on, are those companies that have at the helm executives who understand that people should not be forced to live in order to work, that we may need to work in order to live, but we should not ask people to check their souls at the door at 8 o'clock in the morning and then collect them again at 7 o'clock at night. That the world is too interconnected. Purely bottom line motivated work programs have proven to be vulnerable and insufficient, too rigid to adapt to changes and conditions in the world and the marketplace and society. And the truly innovative businesses, the ones that are doing good while doing well, are the businesses where the people at the helm know how to ask very deep and spiritual questions. What is our relationship to the community around us? What are the interests of the individual employees in our employee population? What are the resources that we have that we can bring together in an interactive way rather than a top-down managerial way? How do we evolve in a world that is rapidly in transformation? If you've read today's New York Times, you know that General Motors just announced that by 2035, they intend to completely go to electric cars. They're going to be completely phasing out all petroleum-based engines in the next 15 years. That's a game changer right there. They do it. Other car manufacturers will follow suit. And before you know it, we may be in an environment where our toxic carbon emissions might come down, where there'll be new jobs in the alternative energy sectors. All kinds of things happen when people are willing to step outside their comfort zone, so to speak, and think in terms of a broader perspective of what works for the larger community. In a way, that's Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness asks the question, how can we be in the world so that we bring the greatest enlightenment, the greatest good to the greatest number of people? And that happens in every sphere, Atma Nivedana Prabhu. It certainly happens in the law, where you have an opportunity to be a kind of window to your clients through which they can see their dilemmas in a very, very different light, so that what they think they may want, by way of a settlement or some kind of redress of grievance, there might be another way for them to see it. That's up to you. You have that opportunity there. That same opportunity to influence people's thinking is there in healthcare. It's there in financial services. It's there in manufacturing. It's there in management. It's there in every field of activity. There's nothing outside the realm of devotional service. Every one of us has our particular sphere of influence and the opportunity to bring Vedic knowledge into that sphere. And if you look for that opportunity, then a job that might otherwise seem really tedious and boring and unpleasant, maybe you'll see it in a different way. Maybe there are actually opportunities that you have in your career that you just didn't see before because you thought, well, that's my material side and this is my spiritual side, and they're totally different. Rather than understanding we live one life, not two lives. We live one life. Therefore, the point earlier about don't take this idea that we're not our bodies as an excuse to reject the material situation you have around you. Those are your tools for devotional service. And that includes your career. It includes your family. It includes your community service. It includes everything. So some point, the time will come when I think we as a institution will start developing guilds or corporate conferences or gatherings by profession, gatherings by interest, so that we can network among ourselves and discuss these things more effectively. If someone is in the field of hotel services or the service industry, as it's called. The service industry is generally thought of as kind of menial tasks, but that lies at the heart of an entire culture depends on those services. So how can we introduce something transcendent into the service industry? These are all exciting opportunities. So I would encourage everyone, think about the field you're in, whatever it may be. Think about ways you can network in your field with like-minded individuals. And perhaps you'll find that there's a program or a direction that you can foster that will bring Krishna consciousness into that workplace. Ultimately, that's what Krishna is telling Arjuna to do. He's telling him, bring Krishna consciousness into your workplace. That's basically what he's doing. It just so happens his workplace is a battlefield, but that's still his workplace. So that's, I think, something we can all do in one way or another.
Thank you, Prabhu. It's a lot to think about. So it's a really an answer coming from a broad-minded perspective in spiritual consciousness. So thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Prabhu, we're well, and for everyone. So now I guess that brings us to we're at just about 7. So we usually have a few minutes of chanting Hare Krishna followed, and then that's it. And then the class is officially over, and then we meet. Then we have to wait again until next week to meet again. Yogesvara Prabhu, would you like to chant for a couple of minutes Hare Krishna before we wrap?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Yogeshwara Prabhu ki. Jai.
Right.
If anyone would like to unmute yourself and join me in expressing thanks to Yogeshwara Prabhu, now's a good time. Yogeshwara Prabhu ki jai. Haribol.
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 Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
thanks for a lovely evening, which you kind of made us. I think many of us just probably naturally felt inclined to be introspective, and will feel that way afterwards. So that you give us something you to take with us after the program. So it's